Welcome to this week's Riks Round Up by Riks Europe. My name is Rebecca, and in the panel today is Elias Norgren and Peter Kleppet, editors and chiefs for Riks Europe. Topics
Thank
for
you,
the
Rebecca.
day: Trump, COP29, and the riots in Amsterdam. Starting off with Trump, he's just announced his nominees. Peter, could you tell us more about this?
Well, the most remarkable appointment was that of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. This is sort of like the American Minister of Justice. And the controversial thing here is that Mr. Gaetz was the one that brought down the Republican leader in Congress. He was also investigated for an affair with a 17-year-old girl. That does not seem to be continued, though, so he's innocent legally. I think we have to stress that. There are stories of him abusing substances. Also, these are, of course, stories. And the key thing is, what is a fact is that he's not liked by many of his Republican colleagues. There's rumors that Trump may try to use a loophole to appoint him during recess. So he does not need the consent of Congress. Now Gaetz is a real Trumpian. He's likely to certainly, of course, end these procedures against Trump, but also take a look at what motivated the officials to start them. Trump was, of course, unsurprisingly very angry at that, and this is dangerous for the rule of law in America, according to the opponents. Now, I guess more importantly for Europe are the appointments of Marco Rubio as Secretary of State and Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. Both are certainly not isolationists. Rubio is a bit of a flip-flopper. He started as a Tea Party person, then was a neocon, was against Trump, now apparently is in favor of Trump. Personally, I think the reason why he's appointed is that this allows a family member of Trump, Miss Lara Trump, to become a senator for Florida in succession of Marco Rubio. I think that was an important reason, we'll have to see, for Trump to appoint her. And I do think that Rubio will end up being quite loyal to whatever Trump has in mind, specifically for Ukraine and for China.
Some of these picks that he's announced are also quite controversial. Not the least Matt Gaetz, obviously, but also in the selection of Pete Hegseth as one of the secretaries of let me see what that actually was, Defense Secretary, who's actually he, for example, has no real political experiences, being a former Fox News anchor. So he's picking people from the media, that he believes are on his team, that may not already have these types of political experiences that one might expect the heaviest ministers of the government to have. So there are some questions raised about whether he will actually be able to get all of these nominees through the Senate. Obviously, all of these ministers have to be heard by have to be approved by the Senate, and I believe the House of Representatives as well, if not just the Senate. Point is, there's a lot of contention here. There's a lot of divisive figures, and we'll see if Trump is actually going to be able to carry his team all the way to the White House.
Moving on to our second topic for the day, COP29. Peter, a lot of people, I'm sure, don't quite know what this means. So could you, first of all, tell us, viewers, what is this?
So COP29 stands for Conference of the Parties. This is basically United Nations speak to indicate an annual big conference where they discuss things. And of course, on this particular conference, they will discuss climate change policy. And it's the 29th time that they organize this climate circus. This time they organize it in a country that is known for exporting fossil fuels, Azerbaijan. The lead Azerbaijani official in charge of COP has already been caught trying to use the climate conference to sell more fossil fuels. I think the fact that Ursula von der Leyen is not attending, that Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, is not attending, shows you that that the mood is turning against the current climate policy model. This is very punitive with climate taxes, climate regulations. And actually there's an alternative model. It's the climate and freedom model. There's been a number of studies published on it recently, including by the Warsaw Institute. And it would entail replacing the Paris the Paris Climate Accord, which Trump wants to exit, with a new international treaty where countries would be rewarded for introducing free market policies, policies that would reward environmental benefits, but would sort of trust innovation to develop it by reducing tariffs, reducing taxes, and if you look, for example, at the history of shale oil, fracking in the United States, this new technique, which is banned in Europe, allowed the US to reduce a lot of coal consumption and instead having fracking gas. So Europeans are very much against it because they claim it's against the environment, but that's the old way of fracking. The new ways are way better for the environment. But it actually enabled America to reduce its CO2 emissions a lot. The same gas that is fracked in America is now exported to Europe. So we have a lot of hypocrisy there. So in a nutshell, what I think is that this kind of, the punitive climate policy model is dead with taxes, regulations, and thanks to Trump leaving the Paris Treaty, I think we'll finally see people looking for alternatives.
Yeah, and the notable absence of many Western leaders from the COP29 meeting is a bit of an indication, I think, that, as Peter said, that these types of meetings and the actual outcome of these meetings have gone too far. And actually the rhetoric that is often used at these meetings, not uncommonly by most of these poorer nations in the third world, that are essentially blaming climate change on the developed nations, on the industrialized nations, on Europe, essentially. This was a very, very common theme at the COP27 meeting, for example, where the idea of climate reparations, a common fund hosted by the UN, where the industrialized nations of the world, essentially the West, would be able to pay reparations to countries affected by climate change. I mean, this is a very sort of punitive social justice type and post-colonial perspective on the whole issue. And I think that many European nations are recognizing that this is not a terribly constructive forum for addressing the issues that is facing the world today, whether it actually is affected by climate change or whether it be like the failures of all of these third world nations to address their own shortcomings in infrastructure, in other types of management that lead to all of these disasters that are commonly attributed to climate change, but may not necessarily be so. I think a lot of Western leaders are, to some extent at least, catching on to the moral corruption of many of these meetings. And I think that it's probably a dying trend.
Final topic for the day, riots in Amsterdam. Elias, could you tell us about this?
Well, this happened there was actually a football match between the Dutch team Ajax and the Israeli team Maccabi Tel Aviv. And many of the Israeli supporters had actually traveled to Amsterdam to witness this match. As it happened, many of these football supporters, hooligans as they actually were, many of the Maccabi team supporters are known for hooliganism. It's sort of a part of football culture in a certain sense, and they had some clash. They had a lot of clashes with mostly Arab-speaking immigrants in Amsterdam, because obviously when Israelis travel somewhere and there's discourse with Arab-speaking populations, you're going to inevitably have the conflict between Gaza and Israel come up at some point. So what you have was were a bunch of Arab immigrants attacking and beating up Israeli football supporters on the streets of Amsterdam.
And Peter, I understand that there are two sides to the coin here. Could you tell us more about this?
Well, actually, what happened was some kind of a pogrom, and we know that very simply because people were using the hashtag #HuntTheJews on TikTok, on social media, They were coordinating. There were some taxi drivers that were coordinating to try to go after these Jewish football fans that were walking around in Amsterdam. They were pushing them in the canals. Even at one point, there's a video where they were asking a Ukrainian refugee whether he was not Jewish and forcing him to show his passport. They were forcing some of these fans to scream "Free Palestine." And indeed, your question, are there not two sides to the medal? No, I don't think so. It is true that before the game, there were some incidents with supporters of Maccabi Tel Aviv. But first of all, this team is not known to be some kind of a hotbed of right-wing radicals in Israel. The right-wing radical team is Beitar Jerusalem, right? So that was sort of one of the storylines that was pitched to try to make it more excusable to have that pogrom. Then there was indeed a little film of Israeli football fans pulling down a Palestinian flag. And that's, of course, not excusable. Football fans tend to do stupid stuff. They were also, shouting some hurtful things in Hebrew when they were walking the streets in Amsterdam. But none of that was, of course, in any way in proportion to what happened later that evening. And I think, apart from the terrible event of the violence itself against these Jewish people, I think it's also very terrible to see so many people trying to find excuses for it. And the broader context is that we have seen many Palestinian protests in Western Europe, specifically in Brussels and in Amsterdam, where not only was there a lot of hatred against Jews there, that's one thing, but there were a lot of calls to violence that the police was simply tolerating. So the authorities have sort of prepared the ground for excesses like this, and the response, I think, must be very tough. Every time now there's a new protest, and from the moment that they start calling for violence against Jewish people again, arrests will need to be made. I'm a big fan of freedom of speech, but of course the limit clearly is calling for violence. So I think we have to stop tolerating that. Also in Belgium, we have given asylum to the leader of Samidoun, which is the organization behind many of these Free Palestine or quote-unquote Free Palestine protests, because many of them don't really seem to mind the Palestinian people being suppressed by Hamas. So the leader of those people is living safely in Brussels. He's enjoying asylum, and I don't think that's very appropriate to give somebody like that one of our asylum spots.
I think it speaks a lot to the core of the issue of multiculturalism when you have all of these conflicting narratives of what actually happened during this incident, that you can't really have Israelis and Arabs, for example, be taking up the same public social space in public without these types of eruptions of violence happening. And this is something that Europe has sort of brewed this disaster for itself to a large extent. And there are many Arabs living in the Netherlands and all over Europe that have very low thresholds for attacking Jews on the streets. But we also have, of course, a lot of these people who are really worked up about both of these sides on the Israeli and Gaza conflict. There are obviously not afraid to use harsh rhetoric against the other group. And I think this is a problem that Europe has to address in some way or another. I don't think you can't really have, if you can't have safety in public like this, one of these groups, well, the Muslim immigrant groups are probably going to have to leave Europe if this persists to be a problem.
Thank you, Elias Norgren and Peter Klepper, for your insights today.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.